What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? Dreamer here. Today we're looking at Shade Pop Warlock. This is a build made by Antens, all credit to him, and also customized to the version I'm playing by Captini Cuolio. Sorry if I said that wrong. The way it works is we're using Chthonic Fissure to detonate Infernal Shade for all of its damage over time at one instant, usually as soon as you cast it. We're also adding into the Fissure Chaos Bolts, which will have a chance to cast Rip Blood and Bone Curse, as well as an untalented Profane Veil and Transplant for some extra survivability and movement. Now the specific version I'm playing here is a low-life move speed variant with Wrongwarp, but you could also use a Firestarter's Torch, and some other skills are possible such as Harvest, perhaps Volatile Zombies to spread Infernal Shade instead of casting it yourself if you want to be a little bit more passive. As always, a link to the build will be in the description below, along with the loot filter, and I'm also going to add in some links to the original build videos that these guys have made, because again, I want to give all credit to them. If you've seen any of my builds before, you know the order. We're going to go skills, passives, gear, then gameplay. Let's start with Chthonic Fissure, our first half of the combo, and also our most expensive spell in terms of mana. So we're going to get Fragile Crest for some mana cost reduction and mana refunded when we cast it. 2 points into Fell Fire to spread our Ignite stacks around. This is an Ignite build. 5 points into Stygian Current for increased spirit frequency coming out of the fissure. This is very important. The more spirits you shoot out, the faster you can explode Infernal Shade. Also going to get a point into Of Gloom and Flames so that we can cast 2 fissures at the same time, going both directions from us. 2 points into Severed Wards for some necrotic resistance reduction. 2 points into Singed by Terror for some Fire Shred. And then the most important skill, Return Below. It says, when spirits torment an enemy afflicted by Infernal Shade, they consume the shade, causing it to instantly deal all its remaining damage, all the damage over time it would have done, all at once. It also makes spirits shoot out faster from the fissure. Very important. Again, the more spirits you shoot out, the faster you're going to be able to pop those Infernal Shades when you're casting. And then over on the other side with some remaining points, we're going to throw a point into Death from Below for some extra damage, and then 2 points into Mantle of Flames so that your Ignite chance goes over to Ignite per second, so you can throw the fissure under a boss and get some extra Ignite on them from that. Now on to the second part of our combo, obviously Infernal Shade. We're going to get a point in Ignition for some mana efficiency and extra cast speed. You could add more points into here for more cast speed. Again, faster casting equals more damage because we'll be popping them more often. We're going to get a point into Blaze Shade for big extra damage sometimes, along with a point into Fleeting Shade for even more damage, but reduced duration. So the longer duration you have for Infernal Shade, the more damage it's going to do when you pop it, obviously, because it would have been doing damage over a longer period of time. Also going to get 2 points into Fanning the Flames for some more damage, and then down here 5 points into Cackling Flames to increase the duration a bunch, which will increase our damage. Heart of Fire gets 4 points for more damage. We're only putting 3 points into Wildfire because that does reduce the duration but give you more damage, and we don't want the reduced duration part, so bare minimum here. A point into Combustion to make it blow up at the end, and then 2 points into Fiery Conclusion for more explosion damage when it explodes. Now on to the first big customizable part of the build, Chaos Bolts. So without any modification, this shoots out fire and necrotic bolts. We're going to be switching the necrotic part to bleed, and then switching the bleed into fire via our unique gloves. So we're going to get 5 points into Mania and Flames for big Ignite chance. I put a point into A Grave for 2 because I'm running a low life version, so dots per missing health is going to give you a lot of extra damage there. 5 points into Condemned to Chaos for Damn chance. Like I said, that's going to switch to Bleed chance down here with Sanguine Reverie. And then we're going to get 2 points into Exacted Libation, which gives you a chance to cast Rip Blood per intelligence point you have. And then also another Affliction, which is going to cast Bone Curse every now and then when the Chaos Bolts hit. Also going to get 2 points into Doom's Vindication for some extra damage, and then Devour the Damned for a bit of health and mana regen when you're hitting cursed enemies. Other options include getting Harvest per point of dexterity, or chance to cast harvest per point of dexterity. If you wanted to perhaps switch Fissure to spawn zombies, then you could spec over here into the volatile kindling node to make your chaos bolts explode your zombies. Zombies can inflict infernal shade themselves if you want a more passive playstyle. Rip Blood is one of our 2 auto cast skills that's going to get shot out by chaos bolts. We're going to mainly use it for ward generation, but it can also do a little bit of damage. We're going to get 2 points into Hemomancer for increased cast speed, so that we can get down to Gushing Wound for 100% bleed chance, 5 points there. Also 5 points into Quenching for additional health granted, and then a point into Hematology, so we get extra health per intelligence, and then that's going to get turned into ward generation over here. On this side we're going to get 2 points into Arcane Absorption, just so we can get to Rip Spirit, which is going to turn the base damage into necrotic. And then this is the important one, Arcane Fortress. Blood Orbs now gives ward at half the amount of health you would have gotten. And then also 3 points into Run Dry for a little bit of extra damage. Our second auto casting skill from Chaos Bolts is Bone Curse. This is going to give us some extra damage, plus some resistance reduction for bosses and other mobs, even though you won't really need it for mobs that much because everything's going to die so fast. So we're going to get 2 points into Iron Maiden to increase damage, so we can get 3 points up here into Brittle Bones for a kill threshold and some extra damage. I love kill thresholds in this game. Imagine not having to suffer through the last 12% health of Aberoth or something. You just kill him outright. Love it. We're also going to get 2 points into Defile Defenses for some armor shred, and then 3 points into Marrow Thief, where if you kill an enemy by Bone Curse, you can get bone armor, which gives you, I believe, an 8% damage reduction. Then we're also going to get 4 points into Conflation to make it real big, so it affects lots of enemies per cast, because it only goes off every 6 seconds via Chaos Bolts. Throw a point into Crippling Anguish to slow things that it hits. And then a really important one is Sigil of Mortality, which adds Mark for Death on things that it hits. Mark for Death reduces, I believe, all resistances by 25%, so that's really good for bosses. We're also going to get 4 points into Reaper's Mark to double the duration that it lasts, so that it'll always be up on bosses you're fighting. I want to point out real fast that while I have these 5 skills up here, I only have 3 of them on my bar. We got Fissure, Bone Curse, and Shade. That's because Fissure auto-casts Chaos Bolts, which in turn auto-casts Rip Blood and Bone Curse. Bone Curse is nice to have on your bar because you can use it as a hard cast. It's only going to go off every 6 seconds via Chaos Bolts. And then I also have an unspec'd Profane Veil and Transplant on my bar. Transplant is your teleport. It uses a percentage of health instead of mana, which is great for low life because it uses basically nothing. And then Profane Veil is kind of your oh shit button. So for 2 seconds you can channel this and you turn into a big puddle that doesn't take any hit damage, only damage over time. So you can dodge big boss attacks with this, get out of packs of enemies if you find yourself surrounded real fast, things like that. Both of these are for quality of life, movement, and defensive options. Moving on to passives, starting in the base Acolyte tree, we've got 8 points into Forbidden Knowledge for Intelligence and Necrotic Resistance. We want a lot of Necrotic Resistance because our helmet gives us ward per second per uncapped Necrotic Res. Also 7 points into Mania of Mortality. This is going to give us ward generation when enemies die, or allies. And we're also going to get 5 points into Unnatural Preservation for ward retention and more necrotic and poison res. And that's going to get us up to 20 points for Infernal Shade. Over in the Lich tree, we're going to get some points into Apocrypha for intelligence and mana regeneration. You can get by with a few less points in here if you need to. And then this is a really good one. Dance with Death increases your damage by 40% and it triples it when you're at low life. So obviously I'm running a low life high ward build, so this is always going to be tripled. Alright, the big one, the Warlock tree. We're going to get 8 points into Chaos Flames for some extra fire and necrotic damage, along with Ignite and Damn Chance. We're going to get 5 points into Soul Stealer for some mana regen, plus a chance to get mana when we hit cursed enemies. 5 points into Occultist Mind for some intelligence and mana regen per point of intelligence. Ward of Malevolence is going to give us some ward decay threshold plus ward on kill, and a little bit of ward per second when we channel Profane Veil. 3 points into Imperishable for a little vitality plus ward decay threshold per necro resistance. Remember, Warlocks are all about stacking a bunch of necrotic resistance for extra bonuses. We're also going to get 5 points into Harrowing Armor for some armor and health, plus more armor when cursed enemies hit us. That's good for damage reduction. We're going to get 5 points into Dark Protections for some ward per second, plus less damage taken when we get hit by cursed enemies. We're going to put 8 points into Infernal Lash for a bunch of Ignite chance plus the 5-point bonus. The Ignite Overload is really powerful. So how it works is when there's 25 stacks of Ignite around you, it grabs them up and gives you extra damage based on your total Ignite chance. We're going to get 5 points into the Ashen one for some increased elemental and necrotic damage, plus also adding Witchfire to our attacks. Witchfire is just a big dot that does fire and necrotic damage, but it can't stack. We're going to get 5 points into Wither, so that we guarantee a Wither on hit, and Wither increases damage from curses. And the 5-point bonus here is going to give us damage reduction from withered enemies hitting us. 2 points into Encroaching Darkness so we can move along the path, and this is going to put Anguish on enemies that we curse. Anguish makes them do less damage over time, plus a little bit of dot damage for us damaging them. 5 points into Scorched Reach is going to give us some extra fire damage, along with when we have Ignite Overload, it's going to Flame Whip when we kill an enemy or hit an ignited boss. 5 points into Grimhild's Domain is going to make Witchfire do more damage per Ignite chance and Dam chance, plus it's going to spread it around a bit. And then a really important one here, if you're running the movement speed version of this build with Wrongwarp, is Fleeting Crone. It's going to give us haste when you kill a cursed enemy or hit a cursed boss, plus it's also going to increase the haste bonus by 50%. And finally we're going to get 3 points into Duskbringer for some extra spell damage for our curses, along with the bonus, which is going to trigger the damage over time part of Anguish when we hit a boss. Moving on to the gear, the main thing you want to focus on for damage is increased elemental damage over time. This stat can roll in huge amounts, and it's really good for this build because most of the stuff you're doing is a damage over time spell. Other uniques that are really useful are Bone Clamor Barbet. This gives you ward per second per uncapped necrotic res, really useful for almost every warlock. Exsanguinous, this is for the low life version of the build, gives you a bunch of ward per second by sucking your life down. Last Steps of the Living, another part of the low life build. This gives you a bunch of movement speed and ward per second. And then you're going to want to get some Malin's Hubris Gloves. These turn all your bleed chance into ignite chance. Very, very important. And it's really good if you can get them with the experimental affix, health loss per second, ward gain per second. And then if you want to do the movement speed version of this build, you're going to want yourself a Wrongwarp. This is going to give you increased cast speed and movement speed when you teleport with Transplant. And it's also going to give you extra spell damage per movement speed that you have. So you can see I tried to get the highest movement speed I could on my last steps. Another really good unique is Soulfire. This is going to give you a bunch of ignite damage. And then other than that, you're going to want to, of course, keep your defenses pretty much topped off. You're going to want 60% endurance, close to 100% reduced damage from crits or crit avoidance, and then a lot of health, because more health is going to equal more ward per second from your low life build. Cast speed is really good. Intelligence is really good, and again, elemental damage over time, here I have the hybrid health, increased health, necrotic res, more elemental damage over time, resistances, etc, etc. Opulent Focus is a great offhand because of the base stats that it gives: intelligence, ward per second, and ward retention. And then in our idol slots, I opted for Grand Bone Idols with increased damage to curses and some other stuff. And then really important, Throne of Ambition, which gives you a huge amount of fire damage when you get it up to 20 stacks. And then I filled in the rest with resistances I was missing. Void and I believe, yeah, just Void right now. It used to be physical. Other good options, if you don't want to run the move speed version of this build, would be a well-rolled Firestarter's Torch. Usually you can find these pretty easy with 2 or 3 LP at least. For the belt, you could get an Immolator's Oblation. That's going to give you a bunch of extra fire damage for your igniting. Ashes of Mortality is a good choice because it has ward retention, fire necro damage, plus extra ward generation from ignite and cast speed. Fiery Dragon Shoes are really good because it gives you extra fire damage, penetration with ignite, stuff like that. If you don't have an Xang, it's pretty easy to get a Shroud of Obscurity with a decent roll on it. That can also be used in the low life version. And if you want to be tankier, you could get, say, like a Flayer's Pride. This has a lot of stats beneficial to this build on it as well. As far as gameplay goes, the casting rotation is pretty simple. You're going to want to throw out your Fissure, and it's going to start auto-casting Spirits. It's going to cast Chaos Bolts, which in turn will cast Rip Blood and Bone Curse for you. And then you just go to town casting Infernal Shade on your big enemies as fast as you can. Every time that Infernal Shade gets hit by a spirit, it's going to pop and do all of its damage over time all at once. So you can continuously refresh it. Use Profane Veil or Transplant to get out of danger as needed. Again, when you're in Profane Veil, you dodge all hit attacks, but not damage over time. So don't go over Puddles of Death, but use it to avoid big boss hits. If you're running the Wrongwarp wand version of this build, remember that every time you cast Transplant, you're going to get 1 second of immunity wherever you end up. Plus, it's going to increase your movement and cast speed, which in turn is going to increase your damage output by a bunch if you start spamming Infernal Shade right after that. So what you're going to want to be doing is looking for opportunities against bosses where you can dodge their big attacks by using the immunity from Profane Veil or preferably Transplant to evade the damage, and then using the increased movement and cast speed to unleash a bunch of Infernal Shades on them in the safety window that follows. This build can also definitely kill Avaroth. Unfortunately, I only had 2 Harbinger Eyes when I started recording for it, and I wasted them both by being sloppy. But you can see I got them down pretty low, relatively easy both times. I don't feel like farming more Harbinger Eyes right now. I have some other playthroughs I need to get to. Stalker 2, and if you're into old school Game Boy games, an awesome game coming out called Edge of Allegoria. And that's it. That's all you need to become an unstoppable face-melting machine. Again, I want to thank Antens and Captini Coolio for the build ideas. They're both incredible build makers, and if you want to try out a fun, more passive playstyle version of this build, I recommend respeccing Fissure into Summon Zombie, and then speccing Summon Zombie into spreading Infernal Shade when they die. You could also put Harvest onto Chaos Bolts for some more fun. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoy the build and Melting Faces, and I will see you in the next one.